Okay, so today I wanted to deal with how to approach the 25 mark essay in your exam, understanding the level of depth that you need and what I mean by really detailed chains of reasoning. So, the question that we're going to do to just kind of make it easier for you guys to see it being kind of played out is question number 8 of June 2018, paper one. And the question says the following. So, let's zoom in a little bit. It says, in July 2016, Apple's share of the UK market for smartphones was 38%. Evaluate whether such a high market share for one company is in the consumer interest, underlying consumer interest. You've got to make sure that your answer is focused around the consumer. Use appropriate diagrammatic analysis in your answer. Okay, right. So let's just go through what we need to do. As a starting point, I need you guys to understand the importance of planning the 25 marker. Don't just dive in unless you're really struggling time wise, or you already just know what the answer is. You've already prepared that essay before, you've written it up, and you should remember it, then go for it. But even in that instance, to be honest with you, having some sort of markers to guide you is not a bad idea. Yeah. So what I want to do is I'm going to take you guys through a series of chains of reasoning of kind of what the key point is and how we can make it about the consumer. So I'm going to just unshare this for a second and share my board instead so I can start writing stuff out. And let's get started. So here we are. All right, cool. The Apple 25 marker. So in my plan, what I'd be doing is going, okay, so how would a monopoly, because this is clearly a monopoly, or how would a big firm benefit the consumer? Well, one of the things I might think about is, well, a big firm is better placed to tap into large economies of scale. But economies of scale is very much focused on the firm because it means that their average cost is falling as their output rises. But I can very easily turn that into a point about the consumer because the firm now is operating at a lower point on the AC curve and their costs are lower. That could translate into potentially lower prices for the consumer. That could be a point, right? So, how do I take that concept and build multiple chains of reasoning? This is how we do it. So, our starting point in terms of what the overarching point is that consumers may end up with lower prices. Yeah. Now, if I want to be a bit fancy, and I definitely want you guys to be fancy, is you should know, and if you don't know, watch my efficiency video, but essentially consumers, whenever they get a lower price or a better quality, you could talk about allocative efficiency rising. Now, I know that Edexcel do not require you guys to have a introduction. I still think that if there's an obvious definition, it's just like one line, is a good thing to begin with, just to lay out the groundwork. So here I would say Apple are a legal monopoly as they own over 25% market share. This is a market which is dominated by one firm, and there are very high barriers to entry and exit. That's enough, but it gives me a nice foundation to kind of build on. Then I leave a line, and now I go. One likely benefit to consumers of a monopoly such as Apple existing or of a monopoly is a higher level of allocative efficiency. That is my what I call topic sentence, whereby I clearly show the examiner, hey, this is the overarching point. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to start weaving in economies of scale. So we start off, that's topic sentence, is we're going to say allocative efficiency is the overarching point, yeah? All right. Now we begin by going, all right, firstly, we're going to say they can tap into greater economies of scale. What I want you to do is explain what these are. That's an extra chain of reasoning. So economies of scale is where long run average costs are falling as the output rises. So give them a very brief definition to give it some context. Now, what I obligate you to do to give yourself depth is tell me an example of an economy of scale that Apple can take advantage of. I think the easiest one personally is purchasing, which is bulk buying, because it's just easy to contextualize. Everyone realistically will need some sort of raw material to produce their good. So you go example, so so you define, then you go e.g., so example, e.g. purchasing. Right. And then what I need you to do is always contextualize it. So imagine it was a question about, I don't know, Tesla, actually June 2022, by the way. Yeah. So Tesla could bulk buy, steel and batteries. In this case, Apple can bulk buy things like microchips. They can bulk buy steel, I guess, right? Any parts that they need to manufacture their phone, you're going to give that as your example. And by the way, that counts as a real world knowledge. How basic is that? So you would say that. Now, at this point, this is a 25 marker. Is that enough depth? Well, no, it's not enough depth. So a very easy way to give yourself more depth is to now give me a second economy of scale and develop that. The one personally that I think you can do is financial economies of scale. Financial economies of scale is the idea that big companies like Apple, they can not only take out bigger loans from the banks, the interest rates on the loans they take out are lower because they are more credit worthy. In other words, the bank trusts them to pay that money back. Therefore, the interest they take out or the interest they give them is much lower than like a small company. So again, so now you go, e.g. purchasing, Give example, like as in contextualize it basically. So give example of what they could be bulk buying. Then you do financial economies of scale, or if you prefer a different one, that's fine. Yeah. So financial economies of scale, you explain it and you'd be saying that, oh, they could take out a bigger loan. What can they do with a loan? Very briefly, because my second analysis is going to be focused on dynamic efficiency. I don't want to kind of steer towards that just yet. But I could say that they could invest into like improving, using machinery and technology that further decreases the cost of manufacturing their iPhones. Cool. Right. Is the paragraph done? It's 25 marker. Give me depth. Give me the ability to be like, wow, okay, that is like top level 4. Yeah. What I now want us to do is we can start showing off a little bit. But because the way we can show off is to bring in concepts. Again, there's a video, if you don't know what this is, called the MES. If I'm getting closer and closer to the bottom of the AC curve, at the bottom of the AC curve is the MES. So if Apple are going from selling, let's say, this many iPhones, Q1, and their cost would have been at C1. If they now sell even more phones because they have even more market share, they can tap into greater economies of scale, and that translates into their costs going down even further. Now, that means that they are operating closer to the MES. So the next thing I'm going to say is closer to MES, which efficiency therefore goes up. Well, the efficiency that goes up is productive, because productive efficiency is the bottom of the AC curve. So now you say, oh, they're therefore going to become more productively efficient. Efficiency rises, yeah. Remember, at this point, though, everything that we've been doing is all about the firm, the producer. But the question is specifically about the consumer. But very easily, all I do now is I weave it into the consumer. How do I do that? I simply say that these lower costs may be passed on to consumers in the form of lower prices, and therefore allocative efficiency rises. Did you see how we took such a basic concept and we fleshed it out over multiple chains of reasoning? That is the level of depth I need for an analysis for a 25 marker. Yeah. So that's analysis number one. Let's evaluate. A very easy evaluation is, well, if you've got economies of scale, there's actually a danger that you start experiencing not economies of scale, but diseconomies of scale. Yeah. Now, if you wanted to broaden that because you felt that you couldn't develop that in enormous amounts of detail, you could be quite clever with your topic sentence. Your topic sentence could be something along the lines of, however, a firm such as Apple may be highly inefficient. Topic sentence. And you go, this is for two main reasons. And now you develop it through two inefficiencies. One is diseconomies of scale. So one, you end up with the higher cost that is beyond the MES. So the firm might be too big to manage. Apple have stores all over the world, manage hundreds, thousands of staff, and therefore realistically, it's hard to coordinate between the various different departments, and that makes it kind of inefficient. So productively inefficient. Now, if you just did that, no problem if running out of time because you can link it back to the consumer by saying, therefore, actually, costs might be high and the price of the iPhones may actually be going up, or they might be higher than they should be. Cool. So that's the potential what one. The second one is you could do X inefficiency. Again, watch my video about inefficiencies if you do not know how to do that. And to say, actually, because they dominate the market so much, there's such a lack of competition in the market, they could easily just get away with kind of being X inefficient, incurring unnecessary costs. And therefore, actually, consumers may get higher prices, not lower prices. That's our first analysis. Second analysis. Second analysis is really straightforward. Second analysis is one of the benefits of a monopoly, as hopefully you know, is that they are dynamically efficient. They have loads of profit, and that allows them to basically invest these profits. So the overarching point, topic sentence again, is another benefit to consumers of a monopoly such as Apple existing is that they are likely to be dynamically efficient. Cool, that's the topic sentence. Now what I want you to do, to give yourself a bit of depth, so the overarching point is dynamic efficiency. Dynamic efficiency. The way you can explain this is to kind of explain to the examiner, why are Apple able to sustain supernormal profits into the long run? How comes? Well, we know that the barriers to entry are very high. They have very high brand loyalty, and people actually tend to exhibit habitual behavior as well. But brand loyalty is the main thing. Yeah. So you can talk about, oh, the barriers to entry super duper high. That'll be your next chain of reasoning. Yeah. Because of that means that Apple are able to make significant amounts of profit year on year. And now you can draw a very basic static diagram with a firm making supernormal profits. Let's very quickly draw that together. So again, if you are unsure how to draw these diagrams, watch my step-by-step on YouTube, going through how to draw cost and diagrams. So step one, those of you that know, MC, and then we've got AR equals D over here. MR is half the slope here. So roughly about there. Profit maximization is MC equals MR, so that's Q1. And then go up until I hit the demand curve, that's P1. And finally, let's make them make super non-profit, so something like this. AC, got from your guiding point Q1 till you hit the AC curve. C1, that's A, That's me. I draw the diagram and I just explain the diagram, say that they're making supernormal profits. Now, this is where we can now drag the point out in black because we can say that, well, Apple now, because they make so much profit, are able to invest these profits into the latest technology and into R&D. But I do not want you to just stop there. There are so many easy ways to what I call blag in the 25 market, and you can offer some easy real world knowledge. Do you guys agree that Apple, by basically having so much profit because of their iPhones, were able to innovate and produce a wider range of goods and services? For example, the iPad, the Apple Watch. You guys probably know more Apple products than I do. Don't just start listing the whole Apple catalog. Yeah, like it's not that. But list like two or three things and explain that actually, if they weren't a monopoly and if they didn't generate the amount of profits they did, some of these goods may never have come to the market. You may potentially have you wouldn't have had some of these innovative products, but Apple are able to take on risk and to take on like innovations that may not necessarily be profit making initially, simply because of how much profit they make on the iPhone. So, in other words, they can innovate, they can produce a wide range of goods and services, they can produce goods that are more affordable for low income households. Another form of blag, just that, yeah, that's enough, to be honest with you, yeah. And you can wrap it up by saying that this therefore translates into consumers getting higher quality goods and services, and even goods and services that they may otherwise not have got if it wasn't for a monopoly being in the market. Is that super clear? Yeah. So that is the analysis. The evaluation, consumer exploitation, which is literally allocative efficiency being really low. So, however, a monopoly may abuse its dominance in the market. And there are two things that you can speak about here. Number one is the lack of substitutes in the market means that PED is very inelastic. There are a lack of other alternatives for you to buy. Therefore, they know that if they increase their price, it would result in a less than proportionate fall in demand for their product. Therefore, are they going to raise their price? Well, of course they are, because they make more revenue that way. And if you look at the price of iPhones over the past like 10 years, it has risen significantly higher than inflation has. So in other words, iPhones have become more and more expensive as they've started to dominate the market and demand becomes even more inelastic. So that's number one. The second is real world knowledge about how actually there is evidence of abuse of dominance. Apple a couple of years ago admitted that their software updates, some of you may know this, if you don't now, you know this is real world knowledge. They admitted their software updates on mobile phones, on their iPhones, were slowing down and killing off the older models. In other words, the batteries for older models would start to basically like die quicker. Why were they doing that? That would obviously mean that you go and get the newer iPhone far quicker than you would have if your phone wasn't basically dying. They got massively fined for it. It was really bad reputational damage. But the point is that is clear abuse of kind of dominance and monopoly power. Yeah? That. The final thing that we need to do for a 25 market is a judgment. And that's it, by the way. Analysis, two analyses, two valuations in that as much depth as possible. The judgment, to be honest with you, the judgment isn't like a summation of what you've discussed, but you try to take a side. So in this case, are monopolies good or bad for consumers? Well, actually, to a large extent, they're probably quite good because innovation and the fact that you get high quality products that otherwise you may not have got. So it could be the focus of the judgment. But at the same time, obviously, there's a real danger of abuse. Therefore, the policy advice that I would offer is the CMA, the regulator, should allow monopolies like Apple to exist, but closely monitor their activities to ensure that the benefits to consumers are realized while the potential risks are mitigated, prevented, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And that's a really solid judgment. So, by the way, that is it. That's the kind of the whole essay. I just want to walk you through a couple of alternative analyses, just in case you're like, I don't know these points that well. Hopefully you do. These are pretty straightforward points, but let me just give you a way of developing that first analysis in a slightly different way. So now I started with economies of scale, and I spoke about how purchasing economies of scale. That's excellent. Then I went and did financial economies of scale. Now, the question doesn't force you to exclusively talk about Apple. So what you could do, that is, I think, a really clever point, is to bring in a natural monopoly. So I want to quickly just do a quick revision session. I know I'm almost going to put in the second video within the video, but really quickly, what is a natural monopoly? We know how normally the AC curve is like a U shape. Well, in a natural monopoly, it takes a very unique shape. It looks instead like the following. It looks like that. And the logic of why is that there are certain industries, there are certain markets where the fixed and startup costs and the ongoing costs are so astronomically high that it doesn't actually make sense for more than one firm to produce this good. I want to run you through an example that will hopefully be easy to get your head around, which is London Underground. London Underground, if you think about the cost involved in building the network system, in maintaining it, we're talking, if not billions, probably trillions of pounds over many, many years. Yeah. So if I think about what average cost is, average cost mathematically is total cost divided by output. Now, if I'm telling you that the starting point, the fixed cost, is in the trillions of pounds, we're talking like crazy, crazy amounts of money. For you to reduce your average cost, you can't just produce a small amount of the market output. You practically need to produce the entire market output. Otherwise, your average cost is crazy. Think about if I do it mathematically. I mean, let's do a slightly easier number to get your head around. If it was like 100 million as a starting point, and I told you that the firm is producing 100 units, well, think about what that means. That means that the average cost is 1 million per unit, basically. Yeah. That's crazy, crazy high. So, anyways, this gives rise, therefore, to this particular shape. And very briefly, then, I want to just run you through two scenarios. So, if I go through scenario number one, scenario number one is let's say that this represents Q1, the maximum amount of output that can be produced in the market. So, everyone basically using London Underground, this is the total amount of output. Yeah. The cost per unit will be all the way down here. So think about it. The firm would be very productively efficient, or a lot more productively efficient, because their cost is far lower. And they wouldn't need to charge consumers an extortionate price to survive. They can make super normal profits even if they charge a price like somewhere over here. Yeah. Therefore, allocative efficiency is also likely to be higher when there's one single firm producing the good. In contrast, if multiple firms end up providing this good, so let's say it's broken up and there are 10 firms, each of them only have a segment of the market output, somewhere over here, Q2, and their cost per unit, because there's so many of them now producing this good, is all the way up here, C2. Okay, firstly, they are very productively inefficient. That's the first problem. And just to make normal profit, just normal profit, the firm would need to charge a price equal to C2. Consumers, therefore, are priced out. It's extremely expensive, or a lot of consumers are priced out, especially low income households. This is a disaster. We don't want there to be multiple firms. In other words, you don't want there to be competition in a natural monopoly. In a natural monopoly, it makes complete sense for the one firm to exist, tap into the vast economies of scale, produce all of the output to spread out the enormous fixed costs that exist in the market, and therefore the cost is far lower, which translates into potentially lower prices for consumers as well. Yeah. That I could have added into the analysis about economies of scale and why it will benefit consumers. But bear in mind, the way I did it with financial economies of scale is perfectly okay. It's really good as well. But this I feel is like a very sophisticated way of developing it. Yeah. So that would be an all kind of an additional analysis. The very last thing that we could have done is instead of that first paragraph about economies of scale, what you could have done is to talk about how Apple being a monopoly, the reason why it also benefits consumers is that Apple can exert monopsony power. If you don't know what a monopsony is, please watch my video about what a monopsony is that will clarify. But a monopsony essentially is a big buyer. And think about it, Apple being so dominant in this market means that when it comes to things like microchips or when it comes to things like the steel that they buy, they're buying in such large volume that they are one of the biggest buyers. They can therefore go to their suppliers and start pushing down their prices. They force them to accept lower prices, otherwise they stop buying off them. What does that therefore do? Well, what that does is it will reduce the variable cost for Apple. If every single unit, like every microchip or every unit of steel is now cheaper, the variable cost for Apple decrease. Well, how does that affect us, the consumer? Well, let's draw it. This is a really good diagram to know. So if I draw it out, it's cost slash revenue. Right. So step one, all of you should know now, MC. Step two is MR and AR. So that's AR equals D. This is MR. You guys can draw it neater in your paper. So this will do. Q1. Here's the price P1, and let's make them make super normal profits like so. Okay, so here's the cost. C1. Now, it's really important that you guys, when you draw your diagrams, one, for the diagrams to be really big, but two, don't shade it in because you only have one color to use. So instead of what I want you to do is do the corners of the letter, the areas in letters. So see that's P1. I'm going to label that as A. And where C1 is just that point there, that's going to be B. So I can initially say they were initially making super normal profits of P1, ABC1. Okay, right. You should know that variable costs cause both MC and AC to basically shift. Now, in theme one, when you did shifts, you did it as inwards and outwards, like supply and demand. I don't want you to think of it as inwards and outwards when it comes to cost curves. It's just too confusing. I prefer you to think of it as up or down. Well, I just said that if they exert monopsony power, their variable costs go down. Therefore, MC and AC are going to fall. And there's a very particular order that I need you to follow. The first one is MC, shift MC down. Okay, so something like that. That's MC2. Then get your new profit maximizing level of output. That's your new guiding point, Q2. Then go and get the new price, P2. And finally, we now shift the AC curve down, sort of like this. AC2, go up from Q2 to hit the new AC curve, C2, and this is D, and this is E. Okay, so clearly their profits have gone up. But basically, why did I draw that diagram? The reason I drew that diagram is to draw your attention to one thing in particular, which is that when Apple as a monopoly exert monopsony power, because they buy, they can push down the price they pay for their variable costs or their chips, that translates into potentially consumers getting a lower price. And therefore, allocative efficiency would have gone up. And that answers the question because it's about the consumer again. So again, just food for thought. Don't do all of these points. You just need two developed analyses, two relatively developed evaluations. Evaluations don't have as much marks as the analysis. The analysis is really where you need to go in on your depth. And that's it. And that will get you into the top level and hopefully high up in the top level and as close to 25 out of 25 as you possibly can. Yeah. All right, cool. Hopefully that was extremely helpful. I'll try and do a video similar to this for macro in the next couple of weeks, but at least that's a starting point.